Good morning, everyone. It is now about 10 o'clock, and I welcome 16 attendees, and we have a couple of panelists here at Oakwood, Doug Edwards and myself. Most of you know Doug Edwards. He's an engineer who is highly involved in climate change affairs. He's a member of the Citizens Climate Lobby, as a few others of you are, and he has contributed greatly to our discussions here. So, Ed and I got into a conversation last fall about hydrogen as an important source of, let's say, energy transfer, and in some cases, direct energy. And we thought that there's not an awful lot known. We all get little vibes here and there, but not an awful lot known. And who better to pull this together than Doug? And so he has done this today, and I'm looking forward to this talk. And we'll continue on in this hybrid fashion that we're getting used to. We have 4 attendees here at Oakwood and 16 on Zoom, so it's a total of 20, and it's only the beginning. So, Doug, I'll let you get started, and I'll be right nearby to help you with any questions as they arise. In the past, we kept many of our questions until later, but I can see hands going up here during the talk, and sometimes it's more efficient if you have more critical issues to understand. If you put your hand up now, I'll also look up for the chat screen, and I see there, for example, two questions. One is, please be closer to the microphone. Your voice is so muffled by the mask.
Okay, and so Richard, for you to be heard, you're coming through my microphone.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll do that. And Lee writes, can the operators please take off your masks? You are totally muffled. So would that be permissible?
I'm not sure. So ask Lee. Actually, you might be able to let these people speak. You give them permission. I'm not sure if you're able to do that. I know she's asking a question through chat.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if she can hear me better than she can hear you.
She said Rick is clear, but Doug not.
So what about now? Is she hearing me better now or not?
We're waiting for Betsy to type in her reply. Waiting for that reply. We can hear Rick, but Doug is very muffled. Maybe I should back off.
See, I don't think that taking off my mask is going to make a change.
Okay.
I really don't. I think it's coming through my computer. So you tell me. I need some feedback from people online as to whether they can hear me well or not. Let's see here.
I'm just using the chat function online.
Okay, so Lee said that she can hear Doug. She can hear me okay now. Okay. Doug is better now, and that's because I'm leaning over close to my computer, which is okay with me. And so Richard, Richard, if you want to say something, then you have to come over here closer to my computer.
Okay, we'll do.
Okay.
Yep. We'll get started. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about hydrogen, and as Richard mentioned, hey, I'm not an expert on this. What I'm going to show you is what I pulled together over the last several months, probably, because I didn't want to procrastinate too long. And so I invite your questions. In particular, if you hear me say something that you know is wrong, you should correct me immediately. And Richard will see those corrections coming in over the line and will warn me about them. Okay. So we're talking about hydrogen. And just a few facts about hydrogen. Many of you may know this already. I just run through this. It has an atomic mass number of 1. It means it has, generally it has a nucleus of a single proton and then it has also a single electron. But there are other isotopes that many of you may have certainly heard of before and be familiar with. Deuterium has a neutron along with that proton, and then tritium has 2 neutrons. And both deuterium and tritium are radioactive in the sense that they break down over time and lose a neutron. It's the most abundant element in the universe. I found this out, I guess a few years ago. I never really thought about it, but pretty much everything started out as hydrogen, and then there was fusion that took place, and so there's a lot of helium in the universe. But for something so small, you wouldn't, we look around ourselves and we don't see hydrogen sitting around all the time. And so that was always interesting to me that in fact, if you wander around the universe, there's more hydrogen than anything else by far. And at earthly conditions, at conditions here on this planet, we usually find it as a diatomic gas, that is H2. You will see it written as H2 all the time. Its density is extremely low because it's so small, and it has a boiling point that's actually relatively close to absolute zero, which is, the boiling point here is in the slide is minus 250, almost minus 253 degrees centigrade, which is within 20 degrees of absolute zero. And it has a melting point a little bit lower than that at minus 259. So if you're going to see it in a more dense phase, you've got to get the temperature down pretty low, and that's the point of this. And the fact that you have to get it down to that low temperature actually is really the reason we're talking about it here. Otherwise, we'd be using it already. Where we get hydrogen, because we don't find a lot of it in our atmosphere, we have to sort of dissociate it from the forms that you find it in I guess in nature. And so actually a lot of hydrogen that we use comes from what's called in industry methane reforming, where they take methane and they combine it with water, and you end up with hydrogen and carbon monoxide. And this reaction, you're going to see it replicated in different forms in this list. I know that I was first introduced to this in what was called at the time coal gasification, certainly back in the late 70s, when early 70s, late 70s, when the first and second oil crises came around. I remember a lot of discussion about coal gasification to generate fuels as an alternative to what was coming out of the Middle East at the time. And so what's produced then is carbon monoxide and hydrogen gas. And then the carbon monoxide can then be reacted further to produce all kinds of things in the petrochemical industry. And hydrogen is used for other things that we'll talk about here. But in any case, methane today, a lot of the hydrogen that we use comes from what's called methane reforming, which is this reaction between water and methane. And the primary output of that generally speaking, is the hydrogen. It's used for a bunch of different things. One that's very important, and we'll talk about, is fertilizers. But hydrogen is also used in gasoline manufacture and all these kinds of things. Okay, so that's methane reforming, and okay, there's another term for it is water gas shift, and they're using an iron catalyst to do that, an iron or nickel catalyst. So, and roughly 50% of the hydrogen that we use in industry comes from this steam methane reforming reaction. Then there is pyrolysis, where you take methane and you just heat it up in the absence of any oxygen whatsoever, and you end up with carbon black, which is pure carbon. It comes out as a powder. And carbon black is actually used for a bunch of things. When I was still working actually as an engineer, I can remember going to, I worked for a company that used carbon black, but also carbon black goes into, one thing it goes into is tires, for example. And actually a lot of other things to stabilize materials against things like UV light degradation, that sort of thing. But carbon black is also used for making carbon fiber. So all these plain parts, these very lightweighted parts that we see being used nowadays, I would call them high-tech materials, actually come from the use of this carbon black. So sure, Richard.
What about ink in the little inkjet that we use for our printers now? Is that carbon black?
I'm not sure about that. Not sure about that. I honestly don't know. So this pyrolysis methane is, again, it's another way of producing hydrogen, starting with methane. Then there's this partial oxidation, again, in my opinion anyway, very similar, at least from the stoichiometric perspective, to reforming. Okay, you're just starting with a higher molecular weight or a longer chain hydrocarbon, as opposed to starting with methane. So you're actually starting with something that has arguably less hydrogen per molecule than does methane. So that's why methane is used preferentially. Not only that, but methane is also relatively abundant and very inexpensive nowadays. Then there's plasma reforming. Okay, they're doing this as opposed to just heating something up. They're doing it in a charged atmosphere, I guess. Actually, Don, you probably are more familiar with this than me. But again, you're ending up with carbon black and hydrogen. I think actually, perhaps in like this might be done in an electric furnace, that sort of environment. And coal gasification, we mentioned that a few minutes ago. Okay, then electrolysis. Actually, I guess I've lived in cities where chlorine gas was manufactured, in particular for making bleach and that sort of thing. And a lot of electricity goes into this. And so there's actually a fair amount of hydrogen that is produced by this. And, relatively speaking, about 4% of the total is made using electrolysis. Again, you're producing chlorine for use in, I guess, in industrial processes. and you get some hydrogen out the side. Likewise, coal gasification accounts for about 18% of all the hydrogen that's produced and used today. And I'm seeing here 30% from this partial oxidation, which is using something other than methane. It's using a longer hydrocarbon instead of methane to produce the hydrogen. And then there are in fact, a whole bunch of other experimental alternatives that are being investigated perhaps at this time. There's a lot of research going on. I mentioned this before. I wander all around the UW campus all the time, and I listen to lectures, and I've heard about a lot of things, many of which are still in the lab. A lot of them have a lot of potential, but not economically viable at this time, and certainly not being used industrially. So then there are, and in addition to that, I should mention, okay, so there are all these chemically oriented methods, but now people are also really digging into using photobiological water splitting, okay, using the sun essentially to help split water, photocatalytic, then biohydrogen routes, okay, trying to derive hydrogen from using biological reactions. And then also now with this nanotechnology. Nanotechnology has, I suspect that it's really exposed us to more opportunities for catalytic reactions, because at least from my experience, catalysts often the reactions in catalysts often happen at the edges of things like silica sand or something like that, where you have a lot of energy involved in the electrons on these little edges. And when you get down to nano size, then you're exposing everything in an element to a reaction. So these nanoparticles, I think, are really making a big difference in catalyst technology. And we're going to see a lot of new things coming out of that technology. I know I read about it all the time. And then, so I know Richard, we're all kind of sensitive as to where this hydrogen is coming from. Is it, so we might be burning hydrogen, but where did it come from, and what was produced in deriving it? And that goes a long way towards informing us as to how sustainable it is. Okay, and so there's been this language that's out there now, these colors that have been assigned to different sources of hydrogen. And I'm going to go through some of these. So gray hydrogen co-produces CO2. Okay, so anything that you see in here that essentially starts with a hydrocarbon, like this methane reforming. Okay, one of the intermediates, in addition to hydrogen, one of the intermediate there is carbon monoxide, which clearly you can react further to form carbon dioxide, which is obviously something that we know is a problem. So that process would be considered to produce gray hydrogen. Blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is a process in which you co-produce this CO2, but then you jam it down a hole somewhere, okay? And and hopefully it stays there. And actually, there's a lot of technology. Well, actually, there are natural processes that accomplish that as well. So that's arguably viable. There are a lot of companies, a lot of companies actually that are pursuing this right now. And at the moment, it's very expensive. Probably somebody else can talk about that in more detail. But in any case, anything that does that is considered to be quote unquote blue. So if you hear this color blue, that arguably, if it's really putting something down the well and it's staying there, or you're completely recycling it time after time after time, blue hydrogen arguably could be sustainable. It's better than say the gray. Turquoise. Turquoise is where you get a carbon byproduct. Okay, so this anything where you're making carbon black, for example, would be considered to be turquoise. Okay, and obviously we need some of this elemental carbon if we're going to make, for example, carbon fibers. So in some cases that might be an appropriate way to generate some hydrogen. Probably not all of it though, because there are as much of it as we probably would need, in terms of solving some of our energy problems. But a certain amount of it would be probably be appropriate. So that's turquoise. Green. Green hydrogen is coming from a renewable resource. Okay, so something green would be, say, coming from water. And there are some other, maybe some others as well, we'll talk about. And then there's a green pink, which I think is kind of funny, actually. And it would be, say, using nuclear power to split water. So green pink it's green, but they qualify it because it's using nuclear power to split the hydrogen off. And obviously, we all know that there's some sensitivity about nuclear power for various reasons. And so they distinguished it. I just think that the color choice is kind of funny in a way. But that's my sense of humor. Sure.
Which is the most efficient and cheapest?
Okay, so the question is, which one is the cheapest, efficient, most efficient? And I think that the numbers sort of speak for themselves. So most hydrogen today is produced using steam methane reforming, roughly half of it. And we know that methane today is very inexpensive. So as of this day, today, that's the cheapest way. It's probably the cheapest way. I honestly don't know. I don't know exactly what the economics are, but that would be my sort of educated guess. Okay. All right. So where is it used today? Today, we use it to in what's called hydrocracking. This is done in every refinery around the world, where they feed this hydrogen in and it breaks bonds up. It shortens chains, shortens hydrocarbon chains, and by doing that, they modify the characteristics of diesel and jet fuel. I think jet fuel is considered to be, it's like kerosene. Diesel fuel, similar, right? Anybody who's been around either one of them knows that they're thicker than gasoline. They have a higher boiling point, let's say. So what they're doing is they're taking the crude oil that you're starting with and breaking it down. So that hydrogen is used in what's in a refineries called hydrocracking. And they use catalysts to do all that sort of thing. And desulphurization is another thing that actually over the last, certainly in my lifetime, desulphurization was very important to clean up the air. And so it's something that's, again, being done to a lot of crude oil that is coming from wells that probably more acidic. You've got a lot of sulfur in there, and so you're removing the sulfur from these different fuels that we produce and use. And then ammonia, which goes into fertilizers. And this number here, ammonia fertilizers are used in 40%, almost half of the food that's grown around the world. So obviously, and we all heard about this, the miracle that ammonia has allowed in the world to feed the people who are on this planet these days. Without it, we wouldn't be feeding them. So a lot of hydrogen goes into the production of ammonia. And then obviously there's a potential use in fuel cells to generate electricity and also as a transportation fuel. Okay, we're going to talk about that and what some of the problems are with using hydrogen as a transportation fuel and in fuel cells as well.
Got a question?
Sure.
Do we have one?
Yeah.
Betsy Abramson is new to our group, and she admits that she doesn't know a lot of science. She asked a good question. She says, can you put this hydrogen discussion in context of the topic of our course? I'm sure you're going to be coming toward that. But her more specific question is, how does hydrogen availability, and of course those colors we talked about, impact climate change and sustainability? My preliminary answer to that would be, we're not using it that much for things yet. So I think it's more future. Look, what the purpose of this discussion is, everybody's talking about the hydrogen economy, hydrogen, and so we need to think intelligently about its future use, since we're starting to get more and more concerned about climate change.
Right.
Would you add to that?
Yeah, so I think the question has to do with, hey, I've been talking a lot about where we use it today, where we use hydrogen today, and in relation to this course, how can we use hydrogen in the future to offset some of the problems that we're encountering using our existing energy infrastructure?
I think you're right on. As an example, I happen to be interested in aviation.
Sure.
And in aviation, there's a big problem with batteries.
Yeah.
There's a lot of discussion about using hydrogen fuel cells in small commercial aircraft.
We're going to get to that.
Okay,
we're going to touch on that. Yep,
so
absolutely.
That's the sort of thing we're looking at the future.
Yeah. So we're going to start talking about the future here, maybe in a minute. Okay. So let's see, did I go too far? Okay, so the idea behind hydrogen is really it's just a source of energy, right? And so we know that to the point of the last question, that if we burn hydrogen, it turns out it generates a lot of energy burning hydrogen, and it produces water, which is we know that we can absorb that water into our current environment, our current atmosphere, without any additional impact, certainly to the warming issue. And so it's attractive from that perspective, because again, because burning hydrogen simply produces water, as opposed to water plus a whole bunch of other things. So generally speaking, when you burn a hydrocarbon, you're going to get a whole bunch of CO2, you're going to get a bunch of water, and then because you're burning this in the presence of both oxygen and nitrogen, you get a whole bunch of nitrogen compounds that also create problems in the environment. And then there are things a lot of times in the sources of those hydrocarbons that also contribute to other issues, sulfur, other compounds like that. So, the point simply being that, just if you stand back and look from a high altitude, I guess, hydrogen looks like a really good alternative to store energy and then to supply energy. Okay, so we know we have a storage problem, in particular in the electric industry, because we don't have really good ways of storing electric power, and so hydrogen is a great opportunity there, or it seems to be. And so hydrogen, it turns out that there are other ways of storing hydrogen. Hydrogen can be stored in the form of ammonia, for example. Ammonia, like methane, has a bunch of hydrogen attached to it. Ammonia is NH3, nitrogen, and 3 hydrogens, and it turns out when you burn ammonia, you generate a bunch of energy too. Okay. And you can actually go back and forth. You can strip the hydrogen off of ammonia and end up with nitrogen and hydrogen. What I have here, so it turns out you can run ammonia through a fuel cell, okay, and it produces quite a bit of energy. And so I just to give you an intuitive feel for how much energy is in ammonia, in relation to things that we're familiar with, ammonia itself has roughly 50% of the volumetric energy of gasoline. So, per gallon of gasoline, we know what a gallon of gasoline will do for us. We'd have to have roughly twice as much ammonia to get the same amount of energy. And so, when we think about filling up our tanks, our automobile fuel tanks, you think about that. You'd have to have a tank roughly twice the size to get the same distance. And there are a bunch of other issues related to that, but just in relation, or just with respect to the energy content, that's just kind of for me, it's a way of thinking about it. Okay. Yeah, Don?
It's better than that, because the utility of getting the energy out in the fuel cell is roughly 80%. And the ability to get the energy out of gasoline in a typical engine is not.
Yeah, there are a lot. Don Reeder is pointing out that it's his opinion, at least, without going through a whole bunch of calculations here in front of everybody, that the use of ammonia would be better than, say, half as good as gasoline, because of the efficiencies of using, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Don, the efficiencies of using electricity as electric efficiencies are so much higher, generally speaking, than internal combustion engines, for example. I'm repeating it because I'm not sure that they can hear you at home. Okay. No. Maybe a battery or something. So anyway, my point there is just that, hey, it's another alternative, and it's all based on using hydrogen as opposed to what we're using today. So what are some of the pitfalls of using hydrogen? Well, we talked about this right off the bat, that in fact, hydrogen is very light, and to increase its density, get it to the point where you can store enough of it in a small enough space, you've got to do something to it. And there are a number of alternatives to accomplish that. Many of them are physical based, and then and those include compressing it, obviously increasing its pressure, and you've got to really increase its pressure a lot. So we're talking 5 to 10,000 psi. Okay, and I think everybody has sort of an intuitive feel for that, because you know what you put in your tires or whatever, and so we're talking about several orders of magnitude higher than that to get the density up, just so it's competitive. It's still not approaching the volumetric density that we're used to, but it gets it to the point where it is becomes more competitive and actually even viable. Then there is cooling it. Obviously you can compress it, but then you could compress it and cool it. Okay, so we could ultimately, you increase its density by compressing it, and also then by making it much cooler, and so you enhance that effect. And then finally, you can condense it. You can get it to a temperature where it's actually liquid, which is denser still. And all of those are relatively expensive, because high pressure, you have to have a pressure vessel that'll contain hydrogen. Hydrogen creates problems with materials. I know that, I'm not an expert on this, but I've heard of hydrogen embrittlement. So you put high pressure hydrogen in a tank for a long time, and that tank has to be replaced after a while, because the metal itself starts to rearrange, and it becomes weaker. And then you're talking about very high pressure, so thicker, heavier vessels, that sort of thing. And then the cold insulation becomes an issue, actually getting it cold. So doing all that costs you energy. It decreases the efficiency of this entire cycle. Okay. So other alternatives are being investigated nowadays, and there's a lot of research going into this. So you may or may not be familiar with some of these. I know I've heard about them over the years. So the first one is adsorbents. These are materials that the hydrogen has a tendency to stick to. So you pass hydrogen through these materials, and I guess unlike a paper towel or whatever, these hydrogen in this case actually sort of I would say would bond very weakly to the surfaces of these materials, and the ones that are being developed nowadays that I've been reading a lot about are called metal organic frameworks, and we're going to get into more detail behind them. There are also these liquid organic molecules that can be used to store or to essentially absorb hydrogen reversibly. And the ones that I've seen, in fact, I was just looking at this morning, involve boron, the element boron that you've heard about in terms of like borax soap, whatever. And using a catalyst, I guess you can go back and forth. You can attach these hydrogens to boron, which is part of really, it's a bigger hydrocarbon. And you essentially attach the hydrogens to the boron, and then you detach them, and you go back and forth. The idea again being that in doing that, you increase its density, okay, because you're closing these bond distances, and you're providing a fuel then, or a source of energy that's much denser, both in terms of the total weight, but also in the amount of energy per unit volume. Then there are these other ones, they're called interstitial hydrides. These are materials that have kind of holes in them, and the hydrogen gets into the hole, and then it will, again, perhaps a little more strongly bond with some of the elements that are in this material that's being used, and it forms a hydride, which I believe is simply hydrogen that's bound to this framework. And then complex hydride. I think in this case, what researchers have done is that they start off and they find that, okay, if I put hydride or put hydrogen, say, in the middle of alumina or something like that, which perhaps is simple, that seems to increase its density, and then they start adding other elements into this matrix that happened to be less expensive and perhaps more effective at sort of complexing this hydrogen into the material. And then there's chemical hydrogen, and I was actually looking at this morning. This is ammonia attached to boron trihydride, and it's interesting. I don't know if I have a picture of this. I'm not going to try it. I can actually show you a picture of this. So what actually happens here is that in this form right here that I'm circling my cursor on, this is a form that has the hydrogen on it. It has 3 hydrogens on the boron, and the way it detaches the I can do this. I can show you here. The way it does this is it detaches. I think that this is the boron. So these are the 3 hydrogens, and it kicks them off, and then it actually forms a big ring, and you get a bond between this and another one of these, and it forms a big, I think it's I'm going to say there are at least 3 of them. There are probably 6 of them that form this big ring, and the hydrogens split off and are available, and then you're left with this pretty stable ring. And then you reverse that process to store it again. It's actually pretty interesting.
Could you carry it as a fuel in your car?
Exactly. That's the point. So you sort of charge it up, okay? Let's say, and I don't know the economics or the densities or anything like that, but it just seemed really interesting to me. And I literally this morning was the first time I had actually read about it. So cool. Yet another thing that I'll probably have to learn more about.
Next year.
Yeah, maybe next year. Who knows? Maybe we'll all have it in our cars next year. Who knows? I kind of doubt it, but maybe you'll try it out in your plane first.
Okay.
Maybe and maybe you should let somebody else fly it that first time. Okay, so hydrogen storage, it can be stored as a gas. We've talked about this, a cryogas, a cold gas, a liquid, adsorbed or absorbed. Stationary installations. Okay, you know, a storage area. You can accept large storage containers. But mobile installations, airplanes, automobiles, that sort of thing, require higher density, higher energy density. Okay. So on a mass basis, hydrogen has a big advantage over gasoline. It's there's a lot more energy in a pound of hydrogen than there is in a pound of gasoline. Okay. That's its advantage. But on a volume basis, this is, you know, quite a bit more than reversed. So you end up with, well, in this case, and I think this volume basis is probably based on very high pressure hydrogen. That's probably at ambient conditions, you know, like 25 degrees centigrade or something like that. So, you know, you're getting roughly, in this case, this example here, about a quarter of the energy density of you know, typical fuel. And so the low density obviously requires very high pressure, typically in the range of 5,000, 10,000 psi. And so compressed hydrogen at 6,400 psi, and again, ambient conditions, roughly 70 degrees Fahrenheit, we can see, is about 15 kilowatt hours per liter of energy. So I think I did this calculation myself, so it's probably wrong. But I estimated a single gas grill sized propane tank, okay, of that size roughly. I guess that it could satisfy, probably at a very high efficiency, could satisfy a house's electricity demands for 4 days using a fuel cell. I know this is something that I've been really interested in because, you know, we have this issue of like solar cells only working during the day, or when you know, turbines not being able to generate electricity all the time when the wind's not blowing. So storage of energy is a real issue. And so I've often thought, oh, you know, why not have a little fuel cell at everybody's house? You know, if it was inexpensive enough, which it is not right now. And you know, could you know, where might that work? And so I've often, you know, just kind of curious how much storage you would need to, you know, keep enough around to cover you, in particular at night, but also on cloudy days and other things. So anyway, just so it turns out that this organization HFTO, which I think it's a hydrogen fuel cell organization of some sort. They conduct research and development activities to advance hydrogen storage. And so they have a goal of providing adequate, I'm just reading this, adequate hydrogen storage to meet the U.S. Department of Energy hydrogen storage targets for onboard light-duty vehicles. So, you know, one thing that we've been hearing about more recently, you know, okay, so many of us, many of you are driving electric vehicles, and we know that, hey, one of the biggest problems is we have these big trucks driving around, and at the moment, there are no commercial tractor trailer rigs. We're just starting to see promise of a pickup truck. These are all battery powered, and then the question is, okay, could we do this with hydrogen instead? Because batteries, we know there are lots of problems. No matter what we choose, there are going to be problems. Okay, we know that batteries are potentially an issue because they're expensive, they're very heavy, their energy density, we know they take a long time to charge, so they have their flaws. And so one of the alternatives is to use hydrogen instead. Is that a legitimate use of hydrogen? Is it economically feasible? Is it physically feasible? Can we put enough hydrogen on board a vehicle and to get it from point A to point B? So the U.S. Department of Energy has established some, I guess, targets as to what they think we would need to accomplish to make this feasible, with respect in particular to storage and material handling. Okay. And then so they talk about automotive hydrogen storage systems. Achieving these targets will then allow hydrogen fueled vehicle platforms to meet customer performance expectations. We all, we're used to driving around a car. We can climb in and drive 400 miles, stop at a filling station for 5 minutes and take off again. So those are our perhaps unreasonable expectations, but that's kind of built into everybody's mind right now. And so the Department of Energy is, they're trying to get their hands around that. And so they set up a whole bunch of targets. And one of the targets, or these are several of them, 1.5 kilowatt hours per kilogram of system. Okay. Then 1 kilowatt hour per liter. Okay, so this is one that so that's 0.03 kilograms of hydrogen per liter. That's one of their targets. And then they also have a target of $10 per kilowatt hour. And this is kind of interesting because we pay electricity wise right now. We pay 10 to 15 cents per kilowatt hour. And this thing is, this is 100 times that, right? So I don't know exactly how they came up with these, but it's something that something that I found. So I found it online, so yeah, maybe it's not right. Then getting into storage again. So these are these metal organic framework. They're called. You'll hear them described, or you'll hear them called MOFs, MOFs, metal organic frameworks. And I'm going to show you some pictures of them here in a second. But you see what, if you take a look at this graph, this graph with that I'm running my cursor over right now is this powder MOF5, okay? And so what they're doing is they're improving these metal organic frameworks. They're changing the elements that are included in them and finding better combinations that result in much higher storage densities. Okay, so instead of just following the pressure density relationship that you would accomplish just by increasing the pressure in a tank, you put these metal organic you put a bunch of this in a tank, and what happens is that the hydrogen gets captured inside of this framework, and it can exist packed in this framework more densely. And as a result, you get much higher energy density stored energy density. Okay, let's call it that. So there's a lot of research that's going on in this area. I know okay, so I get alumni magazines from several different universities where I ended up spending time, and I see a lot of research coming out right now about these things, and they're playing around with the components in the and what happens is that as they play with those components, they change the ability of the framework both to capture the material, but then to release it as well, because you get this you put the hydrogen into the framework, into these sort of interstitial areas, but then you have to get it to release as well. So you have to generally to get it to release, you drop the pressure and some things escape, but then you can also heat it up a little bit. Okay, and it slips out. It slips out whole. So these are different examples of some of the ones that they're playing with right now. So here are some examples of different different sources of energy, that we're very familiar with. Their energy densities, they're volumetric, and then they're gravimetric. Gravimetric being weight oriented as opposed to volume oriented. They're those densities. So you can see here that diesel fuel. This is something that I always found pretty interesting. A lot of times you'll see diesel fuel, the price identified as you're driving along the road, right next to gasoline price. Turns out the diesel fuels, it's actually considerably more dense than gasoline. And in spite of that, sometimes you'll see that diesel fuel is cheaper than gasoline. And that's all just supply and demand balance. Likewise, propane, methane, so lower because they're gases, much lower volumetric density. And you see that hydrogen down here in the lower right, and this is what we were talking about before, is actually much higher per unit weight in energy, but very much lower in volumetric energy density. And then that depends obviously on whether it's lower pressure gas, medium pressure gas, or liquid. Okay, so it turns out that metal organic frameworks, they do require higher pressures, but not as high a pressure as we're generally talking about. It doesn't require this 500 bar. I don't know if you're familiar with that unit of measure. Bar is it's about the same as the pressure around us right now. It's about 15 psi. So you're talking about 500. You multiply by 15 by 100, you get 1500, and then another 5. So you're up to about 7500 psi, something like that, I think. So the latest versions of metal organic frameworks are resulting in a density of about 11, 12 grams. Let's see. Sure. I think I I'm going to say this is grams per liter of hydrogen, but oh yeah, it's 11 grams of hydrogen per liter of metal organic framework, okay? And this results in up to 3 times the storage per volume at equivalent pressure. And that, if we go back here, I think this thing. So this is an indication. So that this straight line here is just compressed H2, right? So that's just the ideal gas law, right? And then you use these metal organic frameworks, and you can increase the storage, the inner storage energy density by quite a bit at equivalent pressure. You know, by as it says here, a factor of 3. Okay, so you know, by using this material, you could decrease the amount of volume that you need to carry the energy that you need in a transportation vehicle, for example. And this was described. This is another. Let's see. So there are some other materials that are being developed right now, other than these metal organic frameworks, and they describe them as hydrogen chocolates. Okay, so instead of containing hydrogen at very high pressure, and I'm going to show you this in a second, very high pressure, or cryogenically stored in very cold. Another approach has been to adsorb it. Okay, you bond it sort of lightly to another material. Turns out that this material is it's a supported palladium surface, analogous to how boxed chocolates are made. So you have to take a look at this. It's actually kind of funny. These materials, they sort of look like this. Okay, they're on the surface is a graphene. So graphene is, I think, just carbon, kind of flat carbon, and then these little chocolates, you know, these little aggregates of different elements are laid down on that graphene, and then you'll see here. This is actually a better picture of it. I'm hoping that people can actually see this. And so you see here that there's a lot of what I would consider to be exotic materials being used, at least at this point. This is sort of the start of the way I look at it, is the start of research. So a lot of times you'll see that, you know, they always start out with platinum and palladium and things like that, and then they find the really smart guys, they start playing around with other materials, and they find, oh, you know, I can replace one material with another and accomplish the same thing with much cheaper results. So in this case, you have this graphene, you have iridium underneath of that, you have an iridium core, palladium layer, and then it turns out that the hydrogen lays down right on top of that. Okay, and then they kind of reversibly absorb the hydrogen to that, and then I think they probably increase the temperature a little bit, and the hydrogen desorbs and becomes available as an energy source, right? Right. And so they compare that to a box of chocolates, which I think, you know, that's a good way of kind of thinking about it. So for hydrogen-powered transportation, obviously, we've been talking about the storage density is really critical. Gasoline, about 9 kilowatt hours per liter. Jet fuel, pretty much the same. MOF hydrogen, that metal organic framework hydrogen, about half of that. Okay, so it's getting in the realm of feasibility. if you can contain it in a vessel, it's still going to be higher pressure, remember. And then the question that I had about this was, does the electric motor fuel cell efficiency make up for the lower storage density to provide adequate range? Okay, so do you really, and that's not the only question here, do you want to just burn the hydrogen in a turbine, a jet turbine like like you see today, and we're going to get into that here in a second, as opposed to running it or using an electric motor? So actually that question is being debated right now. I guess, Richard, you may know a lot more about that than I do.
No.
No? Okay. So there are, I mentioned earlier that the US government is involved in this because they're setting these targets. There are a whole bunch of data. I provided them in here. I'm not going to drag you through all these data here. But these are data that I just extracted from a source online. The source is there. You can check it out for yourselves if you want to. This presentation will be available to you to play around with if you want. I'm sure everybody will be studying this, and there'll be a quiz next week. So these are some of the targets and some of the expectations, some of where we are more or less today, where they would like to be in 2025, and where they'd like to be ultimately. And it's just, I find it interesting because this implies that, people have thought about this. People a lot smarter than me, that's for sure. And they've come to some conclusions as to what needs to be accomplished to make this a viable alternative. Okay. And it's not as, I can tell you that I originally, when I started thinking about doing this presentation, I thought, well, I'll do a bunch of calculations, convince myself that this is either economically viable or not. It's much more complicated than that because of the trade-offs. There's a lot of trade-offs going on. And so I kind of gave that up because I didn't have enough time to do that. Not that I'm not interested in it, but I just don't have enough time. I could get a divorce probably and have enough time. But in any case, they've set up targets for light-duty fuel cell vehicles. Okay, so for a vehicle that presumably will run off of electric motors, but in the application of light-duty vehicles. Okay, then there is a set of targets for material handling equipment. And presumably that would be different because perhaps the size of the storage facilities, could be a little bit larger, and perhaps you need, more or less energy for satisfying material handling equipment requirements. And then for low power portable equipment. Okay, portable equipment's a big deal. I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty sure I've told people that I've become, because I'm so old now, I've become an expert in fixing two-stroke engines. And because of that, I'm now a dinosaur, because nobody in their right mind would ever buy a two-stroke engine to run anything when you have the alternative of an electric motor that you just turn on. You never have to worry about whether it'll start or not. And so in this case, to use hydrogen in that application, you just, you have to be concerned, in particular in portable equipment, that the weight and the size of it allows it to be portable, right? So these requirements are set up. And you can see here, in this one, this is relatively short. They talk about the storage system cost, the volumetric capacity, and the gravimetric capacity. So for portable equipment, and in particular anything that we walk around with, it's got to be relatively light. So you can't have a really heavy tank. And it's got to be relatively small, so you can fit it on your back or something like that, right? And then they have targets for medium power equipment. Next thing that I was interested, personally interested. Okay, so where is this research being done? Who's actually interested in this right now? Is it just us in this room because we're taking this course and have been talking about it for years, or is there actually real commercial industrial interest? And it turns out there is worldwide interest in hydrogen. There's a lot of research going on in these countries: France, Germany, Netherlands, Australia, Chile, Japan, United Kingdom, Sweden, China, South Korea, and obviously us here in the US. So there is quite a bit of interest around the world in using hydrogen. Hydrogen and air travel. Okay, so it turns out that again, Richard, you correct me on this. So electric fans, turns out they're much more efficient than turbofans. And one of the things that I've sort of learned about this, I think many of us sort of have experienced it or have seen it happen over the years. These jet engines that we see on planes today, they are much bigger in diameter than they were certainly when I was a kid. And that's because they've learned this very lesson here, that actually most of the power that comes out of one of those is from the fan itself, as opposed to the jet that's coming out the turbine. And so they're turning a big fan in there. And then there's an issue with these fans. The fan speed at the tip can't be faster than speed of sound. So you have a bunch of issues there, but they can be bigger. So you generate more force going out the back, more power. We know, and I think you're very sensitive to this, Richard, that battery weight and the inability to dump dead weight during a flight makes batteries really impractical for, in particular, commercial flight. There are some planes, and I think I have an example here of some planes that are being built today that have intended use for relatively short flights that will use batteries. But for really long flights, just seemingly right now impractical, because unlike jet today, you take off, you're fully loaded with fuel. By the time you land, you're empty. And a lot of times, if they're getting ready to land and they haven't dumped enough fuel, for example, in an emergency, they have to dump fuel because they can't land with that much weight in the plane. So this batteries don't change weight during flight, no matter how much you use them. And so that is a significant problem, using batteries to power long distance flight. Hydrogen coupled with a fuel cell could generate electricity to power the electric fans. Okay, so you're taking advantage of the fact that electric fans are very efficient. And you store the hydrogen, you put a fuel cell on board, and you could power the flight in that way. It's unlikely that hydrogen can be stored in the wings because they don't have the right shape to contain the pressure necessary, even with these metal organic frameworks and that sort of thing, at least as we understand them today. So tanks have to be added to the fuselage somehow, extending it, increasing drag, all these other aerodynamic issues. Okay, so these are some of the issues that come up with using hydrogen in air travel. Or the fuselage can be re-optimized to look more like a wing itself. And people sit in the wings, and then in the middle you have all the hydrogen storage. So there's a lot of thinking going on in this area right now. So if you hear people saying, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, well, that's in part because people haven't used their imaginations yet, right? There's a lot of opportunity for creativity here. The fuel weight itself would decrease by quite a bit, obviously, because we're using hydrogen. It's in terms of its weight, it contains a lot more energy per unit weight than does the jet fuel that we use today, right? So on a weight basis, hydrogen has a benefit. Its problem is that to get to the energy density drive its pressure up means you have a heavy container to hold on to it. Hydrogen actually can substitute for jet fuel in a retuned engine. Okay, just like today we have these jet engines that run on kerosene or jet fuel. Hey, we put methane through those things in these big cogeneration plants. So clearly those same turbines can be retuned to use hydrogen instead of jet fuel. And so that's another alternative. And it turns out that there is a British company right now, Aerospace Technology, that's designed a 279-seat plane called the Fly Zero that can make it from London to San Francisco using cryogenic hydrogen. 2 tanks are located in the rear of the plane, along with 2 smaller cheek tanks forward for balance. Okay, so you have to balance everything in the plane, and they're using turbofan engines. I think like what you see on planes today. My guess is that this thing is it's a concept plane, and probably the hydrogen takes up. No, I know it says 279 seats. I don't know how big this thing actually is. That's quite a few seats, right? I do not have that right now.
Could you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. So his question was what the comparison would be of the running cost of flying from London to San Francisco in a plane that is being used today as opposed to this plane. And I do not have that. I don't have those economics. I don't think I do. I have some economics in here, but I don't think I have that. Hydrogen automobiles. So it turns out that Toyota and Hyundai, they both produce fuel cell powered vehicles. They're very interested in them. And then there are other people who absolutely say, that's not the way to go. And well, I'll talk about that in a second. So BMW also starting to test fuel cell drivetrains. I think these companies, hey, if you were an automobile manufacturer, you'd be a fool not to at least look at everything, right? Just in case somebody comes up with something that is better than what's out there today. And new technology comes along all the time. So from a business perspective, you know, it turns out that these companies are maybe focusing more on this than other companies who are focusing on, say, batteries. Or, you know, I've actually listened to someone who's very interested in internal combustion engines, who absolutely is convinced that they will be around for another probably 50 years. And that, in fact, you know, if you look at the economics right now, that hybrids are the clear winner. Okay, in particular, when you look at the full life cycle analysis of transportation vehicles, I guess, in relation to the global warming, the climate issue. So there's a heated debate among automobile manufacturers where batteries are superior to hydrogen-driven fuel cells. Okay. Lower distance city driving clearly favors batteries, while longer distance driving may favor hydrogen fuel cells. You know, if you're driving long distance, you get a car with a big enough battery to take you far enough. If you have to refill that thing, you're going to be sitting around for half an hour to an hour. You know, even with a really high capacity charging device. So you know, this is where I guess the commercial debate is going on right now. So opinions and incentives of manufacturers will influence winning technology. You know, for example, Elon Musk strongly disparages fuel cells, while Daimler, you know, that's Mercedes, I think, is interested in both. Okay, well, Elon Musk has, you know, he's thrown everything at batteries right now. He would be a fool to advocate for this. So you know, I think it's incumbent on us as consumers to recognize where incentives drive people's statements, and at least, you know, take them with a grain of salt. Not that Elon Musk is wrong or Daimler's right or vice versa. It's just that the information that you're getting from them is colored by some marketing talk. Sorry.
The thing to me, the infrastructure for electric is very, very much place where if we were to go to hydrogen, you would have to spend trillions of dollars on infrastructure to move hydrogen.
Well, no, you say trillions of dollars, but I would challenge you and I would just say, okay, show me your numbers. You know, show me your. You know what I'm saying, though.
Yeah, no, you could certainly decentralize it. You wouldn't have to have.
Well, it depends, though. It depends. It depends on technology again. So I can throw out, you know, I could say, for example, what about generating the hydrogen on site? You know, I can, and we're going to talk about that here in a second, a so-called electrolyzer that goes back and forth. Okay. And so to the extent that you can do that, then you've now got the infrastructure to bring the electricity in. You got a tank of water, you go back and forth, right? So that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of opportunity for creativity here. And for me to stand in front of you and tell you where this is going to end up, you know, you shouldn't believe a word I say if I tell you one direction or the other, because I honestly don't know. And I think about this a lot, and I'm just telling you that this, you know, I'm always going back and forth on this. That could be, you know, I'm going to show you some examples of some fuel cells and that sort of thing here, and they're not cheap. Not right now. Okay, so hydrogen and rail. There's a European railway manufacturer called Alstom, a French company, that's producing two models. Alstom it actually happens to be the manufacturer of the TGV, the high speed train that runs around in Europe, and Eurostar. Okay, so they're actually providing those rail cars and engines, and they have a version of their rail car. It's called the Coradia Island. It's a fuel cell powered version of the Coradia Lint 54, which is a diesel powered electric. So you know, if you know these how these rail engines work nowadays, they've got a big generator on them that's generating electricity, and actually it's the motor. They have electric motors that are driving the cars themselves, because they found that that's much more efficient. This thing will reach 140 kilometers per hour, 87 miles an hour, and it'll go 600, 800 kilometers, you know, quite a distance. And obviously, you know, practical. It's practical in Europe, and it's actually being used in Europe right now. And since I guess September of 2018, it's been running a route, providing service along that route right there in the Lower Saxony in Germany. And there's a transit network serving the Frankfurt Rhine region, set to start, I guess, this 2022, right? So it'll be this year sometime. So you end up going over to Germany, you get a chance to ride on one.
Brief comment. In Germany, the cost of electricity is twice that of France, and it's 5 times more carbon intensive than France, where it's mostly nuclear. So the TGV in France is very faster than this by almost double the speed, and 78% nuclear power. In Germany, they're shutting down their last 3 nuclear plants within a couple of years, and they're really needing that pipeline badly.
Yeah.
End of comment.
Yeah. Well, my point here is that this is hydrogen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this has nothing. This has nothing to do with any of that. This actually supplies its own power.
It does, because they have such awful electricity in France. The energy Wende is total failure, so they need hydrogen badly.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I hear you. Yeah. And actually, you should be aware that this actually is not along a high-speed line. This Frankfurt thing is going to be local. I mean, I think I'm familiar with this particular area. Okay, so then there's also oil and gas industry interest in this. This has to do with this color issue. Okay, so turns out that the color of hydrogen, the Bakken Energy company agreed to purchase Dakota Gas and reconfigure the Synfuels plant. Remember, we were talking about Synfuels. That's taking generally it's taking carbon or some really a very viscous oil, and then stripping the hydrogen out of it and then generating CO2 and that sort of thing. To produce low carbon blue hydrogen. Okay, so what their plan is to get the hydrogen out of this hydrocarbon, and then jam the resulting CO2 down wells, and then use that CO2 to enhance the recovery from those wells. Okay, so you know the problem with this is that it's really not. It's, you know, they call it blue for a reason. It jams CO2 down just to let some more hydrocarbon come out, which is going to generate some more CO2. So I would say that marginally, you know, I think if you did the material balance, you'd find that there was actually very little benefit to this. But you are generating hydrogen. Okay, so there is an interest in industry in getting into this. Natural gas utilities, again, natural gas, we know from right off the bat that natural gas is used to generate hydrogen. They're experimenting with blending hydrogen into their existing gas transmission and distribution networks. Again, that in principle, that improves natural gas's advantage over burning other fossil fuels because there's a lot more hydrogen than you're burning to generate electricity, and then you're generating water instead of CO2. But you're still got some natural gas. You're still using a lot of natural gas in there.
You know the ratios yet?
I don't know. I just saw that it says here that they are experimenting with blending hydrogen into the existing gas
That's
transmission.
fascinating.
And then you have this issue with well, I don't know if it blends well, to the extent that, how much can you get in there without it separating? I honestly don't know. Port of Corpus Christi Authority and Howard Midstream Energy Partners have a memorandum of understanding to convert their Javelina refinery services facility into the Gulf Coast region's first carbon neutral hydrogen production facility. Again, I'm guessing that, they're planning on taking the CO2 and putting it into caverns or putting it back down wells. I've actually, on campus, I've listened to a presentation from a developer slash utility that's using a particular thermodynamic cycle to produce CO2 to send down to the Gulf Coast and use for enhanced oil recovery. Mitsui, MCF Industries announced a memorandum of understanding to jointly develop blue ammonia projects in the U.S. Okay, so a lot of people are interested in hydrogen for these reasons, because they're looking at this transition and they're trying to take advantage of the economics available during the transition, I think. Okay, so I think I'm going to read this. Green hydrogen be an essential part of the future 100% sustainable energy and industry system. Up to 1/3 of the required solar and wind electricity would eventually be used for water electrolysis to produce hydrogen, increasing the cumulative electrolyzer capacity. We're going to talk about electrolyzers here in a second, to about 17 terawatts of electricity by 2050. There's a reference to this at the bottom of this thing, and I think the point here is that of this thing is that there is a lot of interest in producing more green hydrogen and getting its costs down. Okay, and a lot of what's driving it is the need to store energy, be able to store energy one way or another, to come up with some cheaper ways of storing energy. Okay. So actually here, I think that I can do this. Not sure that I'll show this thing. Can everybody see this?
Photovoltaic panels are an ever-advancing technology used throughout the world, which creates electricity from the sun. However, storing the electricity for later use is the biggest challenge facing users of this technology. When not feeding into the grid, people have had to rely solely on batteries for energy storage, which are expensive and difficult to dispose of in a safe manner and have to be replaced frequently. But now there are other viable technologies and systems for storing energy, even for the average homeowner. The system we want to introduce to you is hydrogen energy storage. Hydrogen energy storage has several important advantages over battery systems. The underlying technology that makes this possible is hydrogen electrolysis. You may remember your high school chemistry teacher using low voltages to create reactions in various solutions. This is the electrolytic process and can be used to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. The machine that does this is a hydrogen electrolyzer. We use hydrogen electrolysis to convert electrical energy and store it into tanks in the form of hydrogen, which can be transformed later back into electricity. Hydrogen electrolysis from water is usually undertaken with liquid alkaline or polymer electrolyte membrane electrolyzers. The alkaline electrolyzer works by immersing two electrodes in a liquid electrolyte. When a voltage is applied, the product gases are released, in this case, oxygen and hydrogen. However, it does pose some problems. It is unable to make efficient use of intermittent power supplies, meaning it's incompatible with renewables. It also compromises efficiency during storage. To store enough hydrogen for regular use, you would need either a giant tank or an additional compressor. The PEM electrolyzer overcomes some of these issues by using a solid polymer electrolyte, which is the membrane responsible for the conduction of protons, the separation of hydrogen and oxygen, and the electrical insulation of the electrodes. It's able to make use of the fluctuating power supply from renewables and results in pure hydrogen due to the solid structure of the electrolyte. It is easy and more efficient. However, it has a prohibitively high cost due to its required use of gold, iridium, and platinum. Fortunately, a new type of electrolyzer, the anion exchange membrane or AEM electrolyzer, provides a solution to all of these problems. It uses an alkaline solid polymeric membrane, eliminating the need for rare and expensive noble metal catalysts. The AEM electrolyzer is a simpler and more efficient system that produces directly compressed hydrogen. It's the key technology that enables lower overall costs. The AEM electrolyzer combines the benefits of the PEM electrolyzer with the cost of an alkaline system. It's an important breakthrough which will enable the economical adoption of hydrogen energy storage systems all over the world. Please contact us for more information on this groundbreaking technology.
And I think we just saw this essentially, so we'll go next one. So electrolyzers, to your cost question, so small models of these things commercially available for $500 to $2,000. They're about the size of a microwave oven. I mean, I looked them up online. They produce sufficient hydrogen per hour that could be converted back to about 100 watts. Okay, so not much. And in practice, these are used to feed gas chromatographs, which means that they're requiring very high purity. And I'm sure that that's part of the cost of these devices. So these are pretty expensive. Again, my concept originally was, I have one of these in everybody's house. You hook one of them up to your solar panel or whatever the heck it is, and you generate hydrogen when you have extra power, and you use it to generate electricity later, right? It's pretty expensive to get a 100 watt bulb going, right? And then there are some bigger ones that are being demonstrated right now. So, people are actually starting to do this for real. And I think this one, this one's in the Netherlands. This is they characterize these in terms of megawatts. That's the amount of power that they're drawing, not the amount of power that they produce. So this one, let's see. So this one is going to be used to generate hydrogen that will be used to produce methanol, which is used in industrial processes. So it will presumably run about 77, it's estimated 77% of the time, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's not like you just turn it on and you never have to do any maintenance on it. Whoops. So I think I did a calculation here. Let's see. Previous industrial scale electrolyzer consumes about 1 megawatt per day to produce 400 kilograms of hydrogen per day. Megawatt day, 24 megawatts, megawatt hours is 24,000 kilowatt hours per day. The hydrogen can be converted to water to yield 33 kilowatt hours per kilogram. So this electrolyzer can store, it's like 13,000 kilowatt hours per day. And its efficiency in producing this is about 55%. So the efficiency is an issue with these things. Okay, that's something that I learned as well. You don't get really high efficiency out of these electrolyzers. So then I have a graph here. I don't know if it comes across that. So these are projections as to what the costs will be for these electrolyzers. What's sort of interesting about this is that, to me, that a lot of times when people present economic information, depends on their objectives. They're trying to make one thing look good relative to something else. They'll present to you their projection of the cost of something going into the future, and then they will compare that to existing technology for pretty much everything else. And an apples and apples comparison would include obviously the projections of really everything that you're comparing, both today and then into the future. These costs are actually including some learning curve benefits. That is, as you use technology over time, people learn how to improve the technology and lower its cost, increase its efficiency. And our experience is, and this is also called the experience curve, our experience is that there is a typical shape to this learning behavior, this learning experience, whatever. And so in this case, they're taking advantage of that and making guesstimates as to what these things might cost in the future. Okay, and you can take a look at the data then. Again, this is how the fuel cell works. I think that I actually have. This is a fuel cell stack. Okay, so you see they're fed with hydrogen, and oxygen. You're getting air and water vapor out, and you get some hydrogen that hasn't been consumed that comes out of the thing, and you have this junction in there. So here's at least what I found was described as the world's largest fuel cell power plant. It's in Korea, 78 megawatts. Contrast that with what we know of here in the U.S., which is typically 500 to 1,000 megawatts coming out of a big power plant here. This thing cost about $3,600 per kilowatt of output. That was the cost of the investment cost of the plant. And contrast that with solar, which is about 1,000, and a gas turbine about 800. Okay. Just rough numbers. So you just see that the cost of these things right now on an industrial scale is pretty high. Okay. And then there's some new technology that's being developed for electrolyzers and fuel cells. And let's see here. Do I have anything in here? So what I was sort of interested in was something that was sort of in one single package, you know, that you could literally say run your hydrogen through it, produce water, and then when you have excess power available, you pour that water, you know, you run that water in there, split the hydrogen, and then store the hydrogen for future use. Okay, and it's essentially a recycling system. Sort of arguably what goes on the space station. You know, that's kind of what they're using up there. And in fact, some of this has been developed for use in that platform. So in fact, if you look down here, I can't highlight it here. It says interesting fact. In 2014, MIT successfully tested a device used in the Mars Oxygen SRU experiment on the Perseverance rover as a means to produce oxygen for both human sustenance and liquid oxygen rocket propellant. In April 2021, NASA claimed it successfully produced a gallon of Earth equivalent oxygen, 4 and 5 grams of oxygen on Mars from CO2 in the Mars atmosphere. So they took CO2 from the Mars atmosphere and they split the oxygen and the carbon and produced oxygen, which would be something that we would need to do if we set up an apartment on Mars. And I think this is the last slide that I have here. And I want to point out a couple of things because I know Richard was very sensitive about this. I think I'm necessarily. So one of the things you see here is that at the very top, it talks about solar photovoltaic power. And it says per, why that's there. See it on mine. I can't move it right now. So you see that solar rooftop, this is rooftop, residential rooftop, is pretty expensive. It's expensive because you're paying people to go up on your roof. And it's, you know, a relatively small installation. You got guys up there on the ladders. You know, you're playing around steep roof and all that business. So it's relatively expensive to install. The costs that you see here reflect both the operating costs as well as recovering the investment with a sufficient return to satisfy investors. Okay, I think personally, I believe, and that is to pay investors back, not to continue paying them, but to pay them back with, you know, a 10% return or whatever the heck it is, and then be done with that. All right. So, so solar PV rooftop, you know, I think people's experiences, you know, if you look at the actual returns on them, you'll see that they're actually relatively expensive. It turns out then that this is the C&I is commercial and industrial. That's what it stands for. So it's actually considerably lower because you have a bigger installation. So the costs, the installation costs, the construction costs or whatever, are spread over a lot more panels or whatever, a lot more capacity, and then you're working on a bigger, probably a flatter rooftop, you know, easier installation, that sort of thing. Then you get down here to solar PV thin film utility scale. Now we're talking about a farm field, you know, 2,500 acres or something like that. all built low to the ground. You know, you're connecting them all together. And this is why utilities, I know I've personally spoken to MG&E about this. That's why they're very interested in this, because it's inexpensive to install, relatively speaking, and then they get their investment back in, you know, 25 years or whatever, and they've got to redo the whole thing, right? Wind. You'll see that wind is sort of in that same range as solar, as utility scale solar power. And by the way, utilities will tell you that they're not interested in distributing solar on rooftops, on people's rooftops, and they'll tell you they're not interested in doing it on commercial and industrial. And that's kind of why. I mean, I don't know if those numbers are perfect or not, but they were not derived by the utility industry, or they weren't derived by the utility industry. So if you can believe them, then this is why the utilities are saying that they're interested in utility scale solar. And that's all they're interested in. And that's why they're putting in transmission lines. And wind, same thing. Okay, then you see gas peaking. Okay, well, gas peaking is all about controlling the grid. I'm kind of surprised it's that expensive, but maybe those plants aren't really that big. I honestly don't know. Then nuclear power. Okay, and you'll see that nuclear power is also pretty expensive. Actually, not as expensive, it seems like, as gas peaking plant, but maybe they're much bigger, I don't know. Well, what's interesting here is that if you look at the nuclear power line, there's this little gold diamond over on the left. And the gold diamond on the left is actually the cost of operating a nuclear plant after it's paid off. Okay, after you've returned the money to investors, you've given them enough to pay them for their investment, then this is what it costs to operate the plant, kind of bare bones, right? No amortization of debt anymore, okay? No depreciation, I guess, no really legitimate depreciation. And so what you see then is that nuclear, once it's paid off, operates very inexpensively. And the reason that's important is because the nuclear plant will last a lot longer than will a solar plant. Okay, solar plant's lifetime, you know, we guess right now like 25 years, maybe 30 years, who knows. A nuclear plant, I think, is licensed for 50.
40 initially, but
Okay.
they're
And then you have to do some more work.
20-year increments.
Yeah. Okay, so every time you have to build another solar plant, you have to invest that same amount of money again up above, which is a little bit more than a nuclear plant. So the problem that a nuclear plant has is that its initial investment is pretty high. And if you can move that to the left, then it actually, in its entire lifetime, okay, after it's been paid off, it can compete successfully. And you know, this is something you and I have talked about before, that if you move this blue bar on the right, this nuclear bar on the right to the left, then the average, when you average all that out over the 40 years or the 60 years or whatever, then you'll find that they start competing with one another. You know, they become more competitive. Right now, I suspect that nuclear is off too far to the right at the moment. You know, there's particularly, that's a huge range there, obviously. And I suspect that reflects difference in countries and all kinds of things. I don't know.
But I just comment on the gas peaking. I believe the reason that's so high is because the intermittency of solar and wind
they're not using it very much.
Be running 24/7 in idle. So they're burning up fuel, not great amount, but that increases the cost.
Yeah, and maybe their operating cost is much higher. I honestly don't know. I didn't investigate. Coal is very similar in that respect. So coal has a similar gold diamond there. Okay, and coal plant will last a lot longer. Okay, gas combined cycle down here at the bottom. that's similar to the cogeneration plant that we have on campus, on the BW campus. And obviously it's running down here. The issues with all of these, none of these is the problem with the grid is that you have to control it. You have to control the voltage on the grid. And none of these technologies that we have here are able to turn on and off really efficiently to control the voltage on the grid. And actually, batteries are really good at that. You don't need a lot of battery to run or to make sure that the voltage is balanced on the grid all the time. It seems to me anyway, from a control system standpoint. And so I think that's underlying this. That's one of the issues. So ultimately, in respect to hydrogen, the reason this relates to hydrogen is because hydrogen has to use power from one or more of these sources to generate through a fuel cell to get green hydrogen, right? And so which one is it going to use? It's going to use the cheapest one. I don't care which one it is. It doesn't make any difference. You're going to put extra power in there, and if you happen to be generating more power off of your solar panels during the day than you happen to need, then you're going to run that into an electrolyzer and produce hydrogen and put it into a tank, right? Or somehow, right? And so, my point is just that one of these will win out, or maybe several of them, and they're going to compete against one another. And there's new technology coming out for all of them. If you look at any one of them right now, their cost, 5 years ago, 10 years ago was different than it is today, and it's going to be different still 5 years from now. So it's not sufficient just to look, to look at one of them, project a cheap cost into the future for one of them, and say this is the cost for the others, and that's set in stone. These other ones are going to improve. They're all going to improve. People are working on this stuff all the time, and that's all I got.
Thank you very much, Doug. I really appreciate your thorough and comprehensive talk today. I do appreciate it a lot. I think it's a fascinating subject. It's something that will keep coming up again and again. Because of the hour, though, I think that we will dispense with any further questions. What I suggest is that if you'd like to tell us your email address, or if you're willing to let me dispense your email address to others who send me questions on email that I can't answer.
You have my email address.
Okay, I know you're so all right with you if I dispense that along.
As long as I don't get any nasty ones.
Okay. I think the ones I've seen, I've been answering quite a few questions already that have been come up through the chat functions. And so I think most of it have been answered. Thank you for coming, and please pass along to your fellow residents at Oakwood here that we'll be having 9 more sessions here Monday mornings over the spring. And what's different about it this time is not only the hybrid technology, but the fact that all of our speakers are members of this group, as opposed to university faculty or people from out of town. We will have a couple of people from out of town, but they're members of this PLATO group, Pathways to a Sustainable Planet, that will be speaking. Some of them in person, some of them online, depending on how it goes. So, again, thank you, and we'll see you next week at my club.
You don't go away with masks.
This go just set.
Yeah.